Is there a brain anywhere behind that counter? Or do they just hire whatever wanders in off the street? That was the first thing the man in the camel coat said to me, and he said it loud enough that the whole queue heard it, which was the point. I was 19. It was my 4th week behind the parcel counter at Hartle's, the old stationer and post office on Candle Row, and I had just told him, as gently as I knew how, that I could not send his package the way he wanted it sent. I felt my ears go hot. I felt the eyes of 7 people land on the back of my neck like a hand. "I'm sorry, sir," I said. "The address you've written here isn't complete. There's no postal district. If you could just..." If I could just... He pulled the parcel back off the scale and held it against his chest as if I had been trying to steal it. "I have written this address 1,000 times. 1,000, to my solicitor. Do you understand what that word means? Solicitor. A man your wages couldn't buy 10 minutes of." I am not going to pretend I was brave. My name is Tomas Field, and I have a stammer that gets worse when people look at me, and I had taken that job because my mother was ill and the rent had gone up, and there was nothing else on Candle Row that would have a boy with no schooling past 15. I needed that counter. I needed it the way you need a stair rail on ice. And the man in the camel coat had walked in 5 minutes before, taken one look at the small, slow boy in the apron, and decided, the way some men decide, that here was someone he was allowed to step on. "The district, sir," I said again, and I hated how thin my voice came out. "I just need the district and I can send it today." "Today?" He laughed, short and ugly, and turned half around to share the joke with the queue behind him. "He'll send it today. He's doing me a favor. Did you all hear that?" Nobody laughed with him, but nobody said anything either, and that is its own kind of agreement when a room goes quiet and lets a man keep going. I have thought a great deal since about how a queue full of decent people will stand and watch a thing they would never do themselves, and tell each other afterward they hadn't wanted to make a fuss. I was the fuss. I was the small thing being made an example of, and the whole row had silently agreed to let it happen so they could get their own parcels weighed and go home. The man set the package down hard enough to make the brass scale jump. "I'll tell you what's complete," he said, leaning over the counter so I could smell the cold and the cologne off him. "What's complete is my patience. I have been in this miserable little shop for 10 minutes and I have been served by a child who cannot read, cannot think, and cannot do the one simple thing he is paid pennies to do. Get me someone with a functioning mind. Get me whoever owns this place. Now." The owner was Mr. Hartle, who was 81 and mostly deaf and in the back room with his feet up, and we both knew, the man and I, that I was not going to fetch him. That was the trap. He wanted me to stand there unable to answer, and I stood there unable to answer, and my hands did the thing they do, which is shake, and he saw them shake, and something in his face got fed by it. "Look at that," he said softly, almost kindly, which was worse. "Look at the state of you. They really will let anyone hold a job these days, anyone at all. I want to tell you about the queue, because the queue is where the man came from. There were 7 people in it when this started, a woman with a pram, 2 students in college scarves, a delivery rider scrolling his phone, an old lady with a tartan trolley, a young mother holding a birthday parcel done up in string, and last of all, right at the back by the door, a man I had clocked without really clocking him the way you note furniture, middle height, a plain dark coat, the kind you'd buy and forget you owned, gray at the temples. He had come in quietly, taken his place at the end of the line behind everyone else, and stood there with a brown paper packet under one arm and his cap in his hand, and he had not moved up when the man in the camel coat shouldered past 3 people to get to the front. He had simply let his turn be his turn. I noticed that, even in the middle of my own small disaster, the camel coat had cut the line. The plain man at the back had waited it. I bring him in now because he is the whole of this story, but at the time he was nothing. He was a man at the back. He had not said a word. "District," said the camel coat, snapping his fingers in front of my face. "Are you simple, district? The thing you keep bleating about. I don't have it, I never have it. The post office is supposed to figure it out. That is what you are for. You are a sorting boy, so sort. I can't guess an address, sir, I said. If it goes wrong, it could. It could what? It could be your fault, that's what it could be, and I'd see to it personally that you never weighed another parcel in this city. He pointed at the little brass plate on my apron, the one with my number on it, the one all the counter staff wore. I have that, number 11. I'll have your number 11 scrubbed off this counter by the end of the week, do you hear me? I know people. I know the people who own this shop. He probably did know people. Men like that always seem to. And here is the thing I have never been able to make anyone understand who wasn't standing where I stood. I believed him. Completely. I believed that a man in a coat like that, with a voice like that, could make a phone call I would never hear and end the one fragile thing holding my mother and me above water. He could see I believed it. That belief was the whole transaction. He didn't actually want his parcel sent. He wanted to watch a boy understand that he could be erased. Please, I said. The word came out cracked right down the middle in two pieces. Please don't. I need this. I need. And that was the moment the cue should have spoken and didn't, and the silence stretched out long and thin and shaming, and I felt the first hot sting come up behind my eyes, and I thought, I am going to cry in front of this man, in front of all of them, and that will be the end of it. That will be the thing he wins. Excuse me. It was not loud. That is what I remember most. In a shop gone tight and silent around my humiliation, the voice that finally came was the quietest voice in the room. It came from the back, from the man in the plain dark coat, and it did not have a single sharp edge on it. The camel coat did not even turn around. Wait your turn, he said. I have been, the plain man said. I waited it. There are 5 people in front of me who have been waiting it too. You walked past every one of them. Now the camel coat turned. He turned the way a big dog turns at a small one, slow, contemptuous, already deciding it isn't a threat. He took in the plain coat, the cap held in 2 hands, the brown paper packet under the arm, the unremarkable gray-templed face, and you could watch him size it all up and price it at nothing. And who, he said, are you? Nobody in particular, said the man. A customer, same as you're meant to be. A customer. The camel coat smiled, pleased to have something new to grind. Well, customer, this is between me and the boy is failing at his job. So unless you'd like to take his place and weigh my parcels for him, I suggest you go back to your spot and learn some patience. I know about patience, the plain man said. I've made a study of it. He came forward then, not fast. He didn't shoulder anyone. He stepped out of the line and walked up the side of the queue with that brown paper packet still tucked under his arm, and he set his cap down on the end of my counter square. The way a man sets something down he intends to pick back up, and he stood a comfortable arm's length from the camel coat, not crowding him, just there. Present. The way a wall is present. And he looked at me, not at the man, and he said, in that same level voice, "What's the problem with the address, son? Tell me plainly, don't mind him." Don't mind him, as if it were that easy. But the strange thing is, when he said it, it got a little easier. Because for the first time in 10 minutes, someone in that shop was looking at the actual problem instead of looking at the size of me. There's no postal district, I managed. On the package. I can't send it without one or it gets lost and then it's worse for everyone. I keep saying, I can't just guess it. No, the plain man agreed. You can't. Guessing an address is how a parcel ends up in a dead letter office for 9 months. You're right to hold the line on it. He turned, unhurried, to the camel coat. The boy's not being difficult. He's being correct. There's a difference, and a man your age ought to know it. The plain man did a thing then that I have never forgotten, because it was not the thing a hero in a story does. He did not square up to the camel coat. He leaned across instead and looked at the package on my scale, at the half-written address, and he said to me, very practically, as if the shouting man weren't there at all, Read me the street and the town, son. Just those. I read them out. My voice still shook, but I read them. Right, he said. Now that town. There's the old market end and there's the new estate up the hill, and they took different districts when they split the route, years back. Anybody who's actually written to that town 1,000 times would know which half his solicitor sits in, because it's on every letter the man's ever sent him, printed at the top of the page. He turned his head, mild as milk, to the camel coat. So, market end or the hill? The camel coat opened his mouth and closed it, because he didn't know. Of course he didn't know. He had never written that address 1,000 times in his life. He had snapped at me that the post office was supposed to figure it out precisely because he could not figure it out himself, and the plain man had just walked him, gently, in front of a full shop, straight into the center of his own lie. "It isn't your business to know my correspondence," the camel coat said, which was not an answer, and everyone in the queue heard that it was not an answer. "No," the plain man agreed. "It isn't. It's yours. The boy asked you for the one thing only you could give him, and you've spent 10 minutes punishing him for not being able to give it for you. That's the whole of it, isn't it? He held the line because the line is right, and you'd rather break a boy than admit you came in here without the thing you needed." "A man, the camel coat's face had begun to color. "Do you have the first idea who you're speaking to?" "No," said the plain man, "and it doesn't change anything. That's rather the point of a counter like this." He nodded at the brass plate on my apron. "Number 11 there, that's so anyone can report him if he does wrong. It runs both ways, you know. It's so he can be held to account. It is not so you can threaten to have him scrubbed off it, because he wouldn't break a rule to spare you the inconvenience of writing down your own address." There was a silence then, but it was a different silence than before. Before, the quiet had been on the camel coat's side, the quiet of a room that has agreed not to interfere. This new quiet had turned over in the night and woken up facing the other way. The woman with the pram had stopped pretending to read the postcard rack. The two students had put their phones down. The old lady with the tartan trolley had a look on her face I can only describe as the look of someone watching a thing she had wanted to happen finally begin to happen. The camel coat felt it. Men like that always feel the room. It is the one thing they are genuinely good at, reading a crowd, because the crowd is what they feed on, and he felt it turn, and it frightened him, and being frightened made him worse. "This is unbelievable," he said, and now his voice climbed. "I come in to send a parcel, one parcel, and I'm lectured by some nobody in a charity shop coat who's appointed himself the boy's nanny. Do you people have nothing better to do than gang up on a man for expecting basic competence?" "Nobody's ganging up," the plain man said. "You've had the whole shop to yourself for 10 minutes. We've all been very patient. We've been more patient than you've earned." He said it without heat. That was the thing I could not get over even then, with my hand still shaking on the counter edge. There was no triumph in him, no relish. He was not enjoying this. He looked, if anything, a little tired, the way a man looks when he has had to stop and do a thing he would much rather not have had to do. "I'll have this shop closed," the camel coat said. He was pointing now, his finger an inch from the plain man's chest. "I'll have it closed, and I'll have him. The finger swung to me out on the street, and you, whoever you are, you'll be." "Don't point at the boy," the plain man said. Just that, he didn't raise his voice for it. He didn't move. But something came into the 4 words that had not been in any of the words before, a kind of floor dropping out of the room, a sudden sense that the easy part of the morning was over, and the camel coat's finger stopped in the air and slowly, almost without his deciding it, came back down to his side. "What did you say to me?" "I said don't point at him. You can shout at me as long as you like. I came up here for that, but you'll leave the boy be. He's done nothing this morning but his job, and he's done it under more than any man ought to have to, and you're going to stop now." A small pause. "You're going to want to have stopped looking back on this." "Is that a threat?" "No," the plain man said. "It's a kindness." They don't always look the same. I did not understand that line then. I understand it now. He was, in his way, giving the man a door. He was telling him, as plainly as a stranger can tell another stranger in a post office on a Tuesday, that there was still a version of this morning the camel coat could walk out of with something left, if he turned around now and took his parcel and his temper and went. He was not trying to destroy the man. He was trying, right up to the last possible second, to let him save himself. I have seen since that this is the truest mark of the kind of strength that man had, that it goes looking for the off-ramp first, every time, and only does what it does when the other fellow refuses to take it. The camel coat refused to take it. "You know what?" he said, and he smiled, recovering, finding new ground. "I don't think you're anybody at all. I think you're exactly what you look like. A small man in a small coat in a small shop who's decided this is the most important thing that'll happen to him all year, defending the honor of a postal counter. How does it feel being the hero of Candle Row?" He looked the plain man up and down one more time, slow, theatrical, for the cue. "Let me guess. Pensioner, bit of a temper. Watches the parades on the telly and imagines he's out there marching. Am I close?" I saw the corner of the plain man's mouth move. It was not a smile. It was the ghost of one, there and gone, the expression of a man hearing something land much wider of the mark than the speaker could possibly know. "Closer than you'd think," he said, "and further than you'd ever guess." "What's that supposed to mean?" "It means," the plain man said, "that I've spent the larger part of my life standing very still while people a great deal angrier than you said a great deal worse than you've managed, and not once getting to answer back. So you'll forgive me if you don't quite frighten me. I've had practice at this. More than you have. A great deal more." The camel coat stared at him. Something flickered across his face, not understanding yet, but the first cold draft of it, the sense a man gets when the thing he's been kicking turns out to have a shape under the cloth he didn't expect. "Reverend then," he said, trying to laugh, trying to get the room back. "Or a teacher, one of those. A do-gooder." "No," said the plain man. He didn't say anything else. He just let it sit. And the not saying, the quiet square stillness of him standing there with his cap on my counter and his brown paper packet under his arm, did more than any answer could have. The camel coat was used to filling silences with his own noise and winning. This was a silence he could not fill, because it belonged entirely to the other man, and he started, for the first time, to look like someone standing on a floor he wasn't sure of. That was when the delivery rider, the young lad who'd been on his phone the whole time, said, "Hang on." He was staring at the plain man, his head tilted, the way you do when a face slots into a memory. "Hang on, I know you." "Don't I know you?" "I doubt it," the plain man said pleasantly. "I have one of those faces." "No, no." The rider stood up off the wall he'd been leaning on. He had gone bright with the thrill of it. "You were last summer the big do, the state thing on the mall. I was working it, doing the food runs. You were on the line, the black bearskin, the red. You were one of the—" He stopped because the plain man had given him a look, not a hard look, just a look, a small shake of the head, a please don't, the request of a private man for his privacy. The rider closed his mouth. But it was too late. The word had been started, and the whole shop finished it in their own heads, and you could feel the temperature of the room change all over again, a second time, as 8 people quietly repriced the small gray man in the plain coat and found they had got him badly wrong. The camel coat heard it too, and here is where I expected him to crumble and where he surprised me, because men of his kind do not crumble, they get more dangerous when they're cornered, the way anything does. He drew himself up. He found the part of his voice that had run boardrooms. "Oh, I see," he said. "I see what this is. So you stand about in a costume on the weekends and now you fancy yourself the law. Well, you're not on your little parade ground now, are you? You're in a shop, off-duty, in a coat from a jumble sale, and you're nothing here. You're a private citizen exactly like me. And I'll speak to whoever I like however I like. And there's not a thing the lot of you can do about it." "You're right," the plain man said. That stopped everyone, including the camel coat. I am off duty, the plain man went on. I'm not on a parade ground. I've got no rifle, no rank, no uniform, no authority over you whatsoever. I'm a man buying a stamp. He said it simply, and somehow it was the most damning thing he could have said, because it took away the last excuse the camel coat had reached for, that this was about a man pulling rank, throwing weight, abusing some power. There was no power. That was the point. Everything I've said to you this morning, the plain man said, I've said as one customer to another. Not because of what I do, because of what's right. And what I've said is, leave the boy alone. You don't need to be in uniform to say that. You ought to have heard it from any one of the people you walked past. He turned then to the queue, not accusing, almost gentle. It's a hard thing to do, mind, he said to them. I'm not blaming a single one of you. It's the easiest thing in the world to stand quiet and tell yourself it's none of your business and you don't want a scene. I stood quiet when I was young more than once, and I've not forgotten any of them. The standing quiet is the thing you remember, not the scene. He looked back at the camel coat. I'd sooner make a scene I can live with. I had stopped shaking. I want to put that down plainly because it is the part of the morning that changed me. Somewhere in there, without my noticing the moment it happened, my hands had gone steady on the counter. It was not that the danger had passed. The camel coat was still there, still red, still a man who knew people who knew people. It was that I was no longer alone behind the counter with him. Somebody had come up the side of the queue and stood at the place where it was hard to stand, and stood there quietly. And it turns out that is most of what a person needs. Not to be rescued, exactly, just not to be the only one. The camel coat made his last move. They always have a last move. He snatched a pen out of the cup on my counter, the one chained to the little stand, and he flipped his package over and he wrote on the back of it, big, jabbing the cardboard, narrating as he went so the whole shop would hear. Counter number 11. Clerk. Refused service. I'm writing it all down. Names, numbers, the lot. There'll be a complaint into the head office by this afternoon, and we'll see who's still got a job on Monday. You, the pen swung at me, and you, at the plain man. I'll have your name too before I leave here, and I'll have you spoken to by people who will take it a great deal more seriously than this rabble. My name, the plain man considered it. You want my name? I do. You can have it. I'd give it to anyone who asked. I'm not ashamed of anything I've said this morning, which is more than you'll be able to say by tonight. He reached into his coat, and the camel coat flinched, actually flinched, as if a man in a post office were going to produce something terrible. And what the plain man brought out was a small worn card, the ordinary kind, with a name and a single line of small print, and he set it on the counter and slid it across, face up, with 2 fingers. I read it upside down. I won't write the name here. He wouldn't want it, and the name was never the point. But under the name there was a line, and the line said what he was, and what regiment he kept, and the rank he held in it, and it was not the rank of a man who stands about in a costume on the weekends. The camel coat read it. I watched him read it twice, the way you read a number on a bill that can't be right. And the thing that went out of his face was not fear exactly. It was the air. It was the particular thing that holds a bully up from the inside, the certainty that the people in front of him are smaller than he is and always will be. And it went out of him all at once. And what was left was a middle-aged man in an expensive coat in a stationer's on Candle Row who had just spent 15 minutes making a 19-year-old boy cry over a postal district, in front of a room full of witnesses, one of whom had now offered, in writing, to be reported by name for objecting. Go on then, the plain man said quietly. Write your complaint, put my name in it, put down everything I said. Put down everything you said too, all of it, mind, not just the parts that suit. And then send it to the head office and they'll read it, and they'll see a clerk who held a rule he was right to hold, and a customer who threatened a boy's living because he wouldn't break it, and they'll know exactly which of you to keep. He paused. You'll not send it. You know you won't. The only thing in this room you've actually got to lose this morning is the version of it where nobody wrote anything down. Don't make me write it down. For a long moment the camel coat did not move. His hand was still on the pen. The cardboard with his jabbing block letters was still face up on the counter. Clerk, refused, service. And I watched him look at it, his own words, and I watched it occur to him slowly, the way the cold gets into you on a wet day before you notice, that those words now described him and not me. That if anyone in the world read that parcel back, with 8 witnesses standing behind it, the refusal it recorded would not be mine. He put the pen down. "I don't have time for this," he said, which is what they always say, the men who have run out of room, because it lets them pretend they are leaving instead of being made to leave. He gathered up his package, the address still incomplete, no nearer to being sent than when he'd walked in. He had not, in the end, even wanted it sent. The parcel had only ever been the excuse to find someone smaller than himself on a Tuesday morning, and he turned for the door. "Your card," he said over his shoulder, leaving it on the counter, not touching it, as if it might burn him. "Keep it," the plain man said, "in case you change your mind about that complaint." The camel coat did not answer. He walked to the door and the queue, and this is the part I have told my mother 100 times. The queue did not part for him. They had parted for him on the way in, every one of them, the way you make room for a loud man because it is easier than not. They did not make room for him now. He had to turn sideways and edge past the woman with the pram, past the students, past the old lady with the tartan trolley, who looked him very steadily in the eye and did not give him an inch, and he went out smaller than he came in, which is the only kind of justice a morning like that has to give, and it turns out it is enough. The bell over the door rang, the door shut, and the shop let out a breath altogether, the way a room does, and the woman with the pram said to nobody in particular, "Well," and the 2 students laughed, the high relieved laugh of people who have been holding still, and the old lady said quite clearly, "Good riddance," and the delivery rider said, "Mate, I knew it, I knew you," and the whole thing came loose at once into ordinary noise, the blessed ordinary noise of a shop being a shop again. The plain man picked his cap up off my counter. He put it on. He had not, through any of it, raised his voice once. I want that on the record. From the first "excuse me" to the last, he had spoken at the level of a man asking the time. And he turned to me, finally, when the room had stopped watching, and the hard thing went out of his face, and something easier came into it. And he said, in a much smaller voice than he'd used on the camel coat, "Are you all right, son?" I was not all right. I was 19 and I had nearly cried in front of a roomful of strangers, and my hands had only just stopped shaking, and my mother was ill at home, and I had spent 15 minutes certain. I was about to lose the one job that kept us. And the kindness in that quiet question, after all of it, undid the thing in my chest that the shouting hadn't quite managed, and my eyes went hot and full, and I had to look down at the brass scale and breathe. "You did well," he said, before I could be ashamed of it. "You hear me. You held the rule. You were right and he was wrong, and you stood on it even when it cost you, with no one in the room behind you, and that is a harder thing than what I did by a long way. I had years of practice. You did it cold." He waited until I'd got myself together enough to look up. "What's your name?" "Tomas," I said. "Tomas Field." "Tomas Field," he nodded, as if filing it somewhere it would keep. "Now, I've still got a packet to post, and there's a queue of patient people behind me who waited their turn like decent folk, so let's get me sorted and let you get back to your morning." He hadn't even reached the front yet. That is what I keep coming back to. He had stood up for me from the very back of the line with 5 people still ahead of him, and he had not used that as a reason to skip them after. When his own packet was sorted, he could have stepped to the front by right of everything he'd just done, and no one would have grudged him it. The old lady would have waved him ahead with both hands. He did not. He went back to his place at the end of the line and waited it out a second time, his cap in his hands, while I served the woman with the pram, the 2 students, the rider, the old lady, the young mother with the birthday parcel in string. He waited his turn. That was the whole of him, really, the part the camel coat never understood. That the man who will not let you bully a boy is the same man who will not bully his own way to the front of a queue to do it. It is all one thing. You cannot have the one half without the other. When he finally got to the counter, his packet turned out to be the smallest, plainest thing, a child's drawing, he told me, when I asked where it was bound, folded careful between two bits of stiff card so it wouldn't crease. His granddaughter had made it. He posted one to her and she posted one back, every week, all the year round, whatever else was happening wherever he was sent. She's 7, he said. She does me as a stick man with a great black hat. Gets the hat right and everything else wrong, which is about how it ought to be. He paid for his stamp. He did not want a receipt. He put his cap on, and he wished me a good morning, and he said one more thing before he went, quietly, just for me, leaning in over the brass scale so the queue wouldn't hear it and make it into something it wasn't. You'll get men like that all your life, Tomas. Not many, but you'll get them, and most days there'll be no one there to come up the line for you, so here's the only thing worth knowing. He tapped the little brass number 11 on my apron once light. Be the man who waited his turn. Hold your rule, keep your nerve, say the true thing in the quiet voice. You don't need the hat to do it. I never did, really. The hat was only ever so people would let me. And he straightened up and he smiled, the first full smile I'd seen off him all morning, and he went out into Candle Row, an ordinary gray man in an ordinary dark coat, and the bell rang, and the door shut, and not one person passing him on the street outside would ever have known. I have thought in the years since about the difference between the man who came in first and the man who came in last. The camel coat had every loud thing, the coat, the voice, the solicitor, the people who knew people. He carried his importance in front of him like a parcel he wanted everyone to see he was holding, and the plain man had none of it on him that morning. He had a cap and a child's drawing and a worn card he'd as soon not have shown. Everything that made him what he was, he had left at the door, the way you leave a uniform in a locker, and he had come into the shop as nobody at all, as a man buying a stamp, and from nothing, from no rank he could point to, he had set the whole room right with a voice you'd have had to lean in to hear. I did not understand at 19 that this was the harder thing by far. Anyone can be formidable with the hat on and a rifle in his hands and the weight of a regiment at his back. To be formidable in a jumble sale coat in a queue, with nothing behind you but whether you happen to be right, that is the part they don't teach, and the part that lasts. He never told the camel coat his rank to win the argument. That is the thing. He won the argument first, plainly, as one customer to another, and only showed the card at the end when a man demanded his name to threaten him with it. And even then it changed nothing about what he'd said. It only proved he'd said it without hiding behind anything. The badge wasn't his weapon. The badge was just the truth about him that he'd been at pains all morning to keep out of it. I kept that job. The complaint never came. Of course it never came. Mr. Hartle, when I told him, mostly through the deaf bits, said the boy had done right and made me a cup of tea, which from Mr. Hartle was a parade in itself. My mother got better slowly, the way she did. I am not 19 anymore. I have been behind one counter or another for a long time now, and I have, exactly as he said, met a few more men in camel coats, and I have learned that he was right about all of it, that there is rarely anyone there to come up the line for you, and that the thing to do is hold the rule anyway, in the quiet voice, and wait your turn, and trust that being right is a kind of standing, still that the loudest man in the room cannot, in the end, shout down. I never saw him again. I never learned more of him than was on that worn card, and I gave the card back in my mind the moment he left. It was never mine to keep, and the name was never the point. But every week, for years after, on the morning the post for the country districts went out, I would catch myself watching the small parcels go through my hands, the careful ones, the ones folded between stiff cards so they wouldn't crease, and I would think of a stick man in a great black hat drawn by a 7-year-old who had everything else wonderfully wrong, and I would stand a little straighter at my counter, and I would wait my turn, and I would keep my nerve. That was all he asked. It turned out to be enough.